that no matter what you do, it could be plastics, it could be ortho, it could be robot, right? Like I just said, sometimes you have a hard time ventilating a robot. Any anesthetic can become hard. So I guess don't ever think that just because you're scheduled for a general day that you're going to have it easy, because the patient could make it hard, right? So just keep in the back of your mind and kind of stay on your toes, because at any moment, that's actually one of the things that I think that is probably where a lot of our stress comes into play in this profession, but it equally becomes one of those things that you actually enjoy, because it keeps you vigilant and it keeps you like connected to what you're doing, if that makes sense. I'm Jenny Fennell, CRNA and founder of CRNA School Prep Academy. I have always had a passion for helping those who aspire to become a CRNA. A couple of years ago, I started mentoring a handful of prospective students. Fast forward to today, and I have a successful mentoring program that has impacted hundreds of aspiring and now current nurse anesthesia students. What I enjoy the most in my business is connecting with you, the future CRNA. I love learning and growing with you. The road to CRNA is full of unique challenges, and no two journeys are the same. But every journey has a learning opportunity. I'm here to share what I have learned over the years from not just my students, but CRNA community leaders, program faculty, and from my time as a practicing CRNA. This will be your one-stop shop to get the mentoring you need to not only guide you into this career path, but support you all the way through to graduation day. So if you're a nursing student who's exploring the possibility, an ICU nurse actively pursuing CRNA, or a current nurse anesthesia student, you're in the right place. Tune in for inspiration and actionable takeaways that will help you from start to finish. Let's get started. Hey future CRNA, another daily dose of inspiration from a CRNA School Prep Academy student. Thank you, CRNA School Prep Academy. I have applied to Case Western 4 times and got rejected 3 times. Those rejections happened before I found CSBA. After my 3rd rejection, I found an amazing mentor, Haley, through NTN's mock interview service, who told me what I need to do over the next year. I'm someone who did not do well in nursing school at the beginning, with a 2.7 GPA in undergrad and a 2.74 in RN school. I didn't know there would ever be any hope for me, but I worked my butt off to get a 3.8 in my RN to BSN, and I got my CCRN at the same time. I took some advising from the program director, who recommended that I take advanced pathophysiology. I got an A in that course. I continued to precept, do charge nurse on my units, and participate in some sort of committee. When I decided to do travel nursing, I was concerned I'd be looked at different. My program director at this time said while they take travelers, they found that travel nurses tend to take easier assignments than the program usually likes their candidates to take. I happened to be a charge nurse and preceptor on my current travel assignment. The director emphasized that I needed to mention this, which I did, because it put me apart from the other travelers. I also took my CSC this application year, which helped me study a lot sooner than I did in the past. I thought despite my efforts to consistently improve and prepare for my final interview at my top choice, my interview went poorly. I chose the first day, the first time slot, and I was more confident in my preparedness thanks to CSBA. Despite me not feeling the best, I wasn't going to give up. While working Hurricane Ian in Florida, I got a decision letter. I was accepted. I'm still in disbelief that after 4 attempts and 3 rejections, I finally got in. I couldn't have done it without CSBA, Haley, and the amazing mock interview mentors who have helped prepare me along the way. Use this service, it will make a difference. Thank you to all the Academy for helping me achieve what I thought was impossible. Endless thank yous. Dear future CRNA, I love this share, and you know who you are, so congratulations. I'm so incredibly proud of you. And if you're listening to this story, I would love to be able to help you as well. Be sure to sign up for our free Future CRNA newsletter just by clicking the link below in the show notes or comments. Cheers to your future. Now back to the show. One of my favorite types of anesthetics to do and the types of cases that go along with them. As a practicing CRNA of 8 years, I'm going to share with you what my favorites are. I'm also going to share with you what I think are maybe the easiest types of cases and what are the hardest cases. I'm going to save that for the very end, so be sure to stick around to the end to hear what I think is one of the hardest cases to do as an anesthesia provider. Let's go ahead and get into today's show. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of CRNA School Prep Academy. I'm your host, Jenny Fennell, CRNA of 8 years. And today, this episode, I'm going to share what I think through my own personal opinion and practice, what my favorite types of anesthetics are, and then what kind of cases that means that that I'm doing that are my favorite. And then I'm also going to share with you what I think are probably some of the easiest types of anesthetics to do, as well as what I think the hardest types of anesthetics are to do. So let's go ahead and get into today's show. So For those of you who are new, welcome to the show. I'm excited you're here. And for those of you who've been around, you may have know my background, you may not, but I just want to remind you that I've kind of had quite a variety of practice at this point, and I intentionally did that in my own practice, especially early on. I was really seeking out a wide scope of practice, and I wanted to do it all. I wanted to get my hands on everything. And it really came from me just trying to figure out what I wanted, right? And figuring out what my interests were. And surprisingly, when I was in school, I actually found that I loved open heart. I loved cardiac physiology. I loved the pharmacology that went with it. So I really made that my goal to join an open heart team shortly after I graduated anesthesia school. And within 6 months, I was able to join an open heart team. I did call, I did 24-hour shifts. During that time, I also got to do a lot of OB because the 24-hour CRNAs also had to be very proficient at OB. You were one of two CRNAs in the hospital overnight with one attending. That was the only people who staffed the entire level 1 trauma hospital. So again, you had to know how to do OB, and you had to be really proficient at doing open heart for any class 1s that maybe came in throughout the night. So that was what I strove to do, and I enjoyed it. It was fun. It was challenging. And maybe I'm a little biased in the fact that, most of what I have to share with you as far as my favorite types of cases to do relate to my open heart days. But let me go into why I think open heart is enjoyable. And again, just know this is my own personal opinion. There are some people who are like, absolutely not. You're crazy for thinking open heart is the best type of anesthetic to do. But if you share my passion for pathophysiology and pharmacology, you may find that you also equally will enjoy it. So that's primarily why I feel like I do enjoy those types of cases, because it really gets me thinking about the pathophysiology process. And then the titration. I love drugs. I mean, I don't do drugs, but I love giving drugs. So I love the process behind pharmacology and pathophysiology. It just really gets my nerdy brain on fire, which you get to do pretty much all day, every day when you do open heart. Is you get to physically see how medications work, and you get to actually see it unfold before your eyes, which I think is incredibly rewarding and a lot of fun. But yeah, open heart, the reason why I liked it so much is because there's a lot of titration there. And I always challenge myself to literally get the blood pressure to be exactly where I want it. With that's just 1 point higher, 1 point lower. If they're cannulating the aorta and you need that blood pressure to be, right at 90 systolic, I would challenge myself to get literally right at 90 systolic and then keep it there for, 60 seconds or whatever it would be, which was equally challenging, right? So you had to really be good at titrating little micro doses of vasopressors, knowing exactly how they worked for that particular patient, mixing ephedrine and neo in just the right combination, or maybe vasopressin or whatever it is you're using. There's a lot of titration going on, a lot of mixing, a lot of drugs. We often would have levophed drips in the background, Clevoprex, which is clovidipine, which is a calcium channel blocker. We would use that. I know a lot of people are probably more familiar with cardine, but again, I think Clevoprex is an amazing drug. I would also use it in the carotids. I would do over cardine, but cardine's fine. But Clevoprex, again, it was something that I got really comfortable using and titrating during my open heart time. So I routinely went to that during my carotids as well. But that being said, that was one of the reasons why I loved it, is because I got to really mix drugs and get really familiar and comfortable with titration. I also got incredibly comfortable using gas. Now, I know you're probably like, what? What do you mean by that? And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of places who practice open heart who do not do this technique. So I think I've said this in a previous episode, do not do this technique and assume that all places do it this way. Because what I want to share with you too is every place that does open heart, right? They kind of have their own method, right? And their own way that works for their facility that the CRNAs are used to or accustomed to. And so we had our own way, right? We had a way that really worked really well, that we found worked out great for the patient, et cetera, et cetera. And we often would titrate our anesthetic gases to quickly make an adjustment in the blood pressure. Now, you have to be really careful with that technique, because if you're not doing it carefully, you can have a lot of swings. But again, we would do it so controlled that we knew exactly how to get the blood pressure down when we needed it. You would just, turn your flows up, flows down. Now, was that bad for the environment? Yeah, probably really bad for the environment. Since then, I've become very conscientious in my own practice on my flows and keeping flows low to help prevent destruction of the environment, because anesthetic gases are really toxic for the ozone layer. So that being said, knowing what I know now, I probably would have adjusted that practice if I was still practicing open heart. But we would routinely do it in a pinch if you had to, and it was like you didn't have, a minute or 60 seconds to draw up a drug and you had gas readily available. That's why we would use it. It was not first line, but again, if we were in a pinch and we needed it quickly for whatever reason, we would use it because it was already there and going, so it was easy to have access to, right? Versus turning your back, drawing up and mixing up a drug, and then turn around and pushing it. I mean, typically when we had drugs, we would always kind of pre-plan what we needed pre-mixed. Whether that would be baby epi, which is just 10 mics per ml of epi, whether that be a Levophed drip, a Clevaprex drip, whatever. There are so many times where I'm like, dang it, like I would think, the blood pressure for whatever reason just keeps creeping up, and it takes a while to get a Clevaprex drip out, string it all up, put it on a pump, and and you need the blood pressure down like now, not in a minute or two. Like you need it down like right now. They're cannulating. You have to get it down. So that's why gas. Unless you had some diluted nitro or something like that, but gas can get the pressure down. And then you got to make sure you don't bottom it out, right? So we use gas routinely to kind of gauge and control our blood pressure, which I also found challenging and a lot of fun. And then just the physiology of it all, right? Understanding how, the different chambers in the heart work, and right-sided heart failure versus left-sided heart failure, pulmonary hypertension, just really fascinating things, AFib, and you would physically get to see AFib, like you could see the heart flutter, go through VFib and VTAC and all the different arrhythmias because they're causing the heart to fibrillate before they put them on bypass. So it's just neat to actually physically see what that looked like in a heart, to see it kind of quivering there. I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. I mean, I love watching open heart. It's just so fascinating to me that you can literally drain the blood out of someone's body, put them on a cardiac bypass machine, and then put the blood back and then wake them up and they're like, yeah, I'm good. It's just so cool. So partially my favorite is because open heart is just the coolest surgery that even exists, in my opinion. Yeah, and there's just, the patients can be incredibly sick too, right? And so it's really rewarding to know that you're making a huge impact in their life and essentially saving their life. Or people that maybe have like a bicuspid valve, for example, and have severe aortic stenosis, you can replace the valve. It's just the coolest thing ever. I don't know. So number one, open heart is my favorite type of case. Now, I now work at a peds hospital. I have not really been interested in doing peds heart, mostly because I'm PRN at this point in my life, and I'll get into that in a different episode as far as things to consider when you're looking for a CRNA job, and I'll discuss that later. But I'm at a point in my life where my schedule is what is taking priority over my experience at this point. Don't get me wrong, I still value my experience, but my schedule, like that's what I need right now in my life is my schedule. So that being said, I haven't ventured into doing peds open heart. I like my PRN position. I don't want to join the open heart team. It is kind of a big commitment to join an open heart team. It typically comes with more call, and things like that. So just not where I'm at in my life. But I do think it's cool. I think it's amazing. So anyways, and then my second favorite type of case would be thoracic cases. So lungs, lobectomies, VATS, things like that. So thoracic lungs. And the reason why I like lungs is because there's the challenging aspect of managing an airway doing a double lumen tube, right? Those are a little bit more challenging to put in. You have to use a fiber optic scope to confirm placement, which again was always kind of fun to manipulate a little fiber optic scope. Getting good at using that made me feel good. Like if I ever had an airway emergency, I know how to use that scope, right? And it's kind of, you might think, oh, that seems easy. No, it's actually not as easy as it looks. Because again, when you're, adjusting it and kind of twisting it different directions, you have to, be able to identify your anatomy incredibly well. And then, adjusting the end of the scope, it's kind of opposite of what you would think. When you pull down, it goes up, and when you push up, it goes down as far as the end of the fiber optic scope. So it can just be and you can get really easily disoriented when you're inside the lungs and what you're looking for, you're looking at the different types of lobes, trying to find tracheal rings, things like that. So I got to use that quite often during my double lumen tube placements, so I got really good at using a fiber optic scope. So that leads me to one of the things that I really like about doing open heart and thoracic cases is there's tons of hands-on skills. I mean, in open heart, I would do A-lines, a big bore IV. I love starting 14 gauge IVs. It's just so much fun. It's so gratifying. So I enjoyed that, but there's a lot of hands-on skills. In the lungs, we would do thoracic epidurals, and those are fun to place. Definitely a different challenge than placing a lumbar epidural. Doing a thoracic epidural was just different. I mean, it was obviously you're going to the same space, right? But the technique and the anatomy is different. And so it was kind of a nice challenge. And then, man, the lungs though, the airway management sometimes can be a really big challenge, right? To make sure the lung is staying deflated so the surgeon can operate, that you're actually able to oxygenate and ventilate through one lung. So it's a lot. The thoracic cases could be a lot of work. But again, a lot of fun hands-on skills that come with it, the physiology of it, just a lot of fun. Those are also typically cases that where extubation was crucial, that they had to earn that extubation. There were usually already people who were respiratory cripples and had a lot of disease process going on. So waking those patients up was challenging. But we would extubate those patients and take them over to recovery. So that's, the fact that they were healthy enough to be able to be extubated and taken to recovery, sometimes the ICU, but just depending on the case, right? So I enjoyed doing lungs. Number 3 was vascular. So can you see a theme here? Heart, thoracic, vascular. I mean, I did do that for a good chunk of my career. So naturally, that's what I was interested in. But I loved vascular. I thought the physiology, again, the titration of drips, fluid management. Open heart fluid management is huge too, although you don't really run them. You don't give them a lot of fluid in open heart. You tend to run them pretty dry. But in vascular, some of those like the abdominal aortic aneurysms, some of them, some of that is just a massive amount of fluid management. Like you have cell saver at the bedside, and you're just giving blood products and cryo and FFP. And so understanding all of that and reading ABGs and interpreting tags and, again, titrating vasopressors, you're dealing with a lot of acidosis. You're dealing with a lot of acid-base shifts in a big vascular case because they're going to be clamped and creating that acidic environment. When they unclamp, it's like the surge of vasodilatation from all the, acid buildup. And so you're dealing with that. They're dumping acid right on the heart. So you're making sure the patient stays stable through that. You're giving calcium and bicarb and all just constant. And it's a lot of fun. I know you're like, oh my gosh, that seems like so much, but it's fun, you guys. And don't get me wrong, there were plenty of those cases. Some of them went really straightforward and were like, wow, this is actually a really easy AAA. And then there was other ones where it was just I was sweating buckets. And I didn't sit down for the whole case. I was just running. And multiple times we had, 3 or 4 different CRNA providers in the room at one time, all hands on deck kind of thing. Those weren't nearly as common, but most of them I would say went pretty straightforward. They weren't as scary or terrifying as you may think. But every now and then you had someone who just was not. It was just a lot of needed a lot of extra additional support and help to get through the case clear and free. So anyways, and then carotids. Carotids are incredibly challenging. They're hard, but they're equally really fun because they are hard. And so I really liked carotids. Sometimes they were just such a pain though. But it was a nice challenge, right? And I just enjoyed kind of anticipating. They tend to be patients whose blood pressure just swings. It's from one extreme 200 systolic to 40 systolic. It's boom, boom. You're like, what? And that's just the type. That's why they have vascular disease, right? They have their compliance and their vessels are just they're so non-compliant. They're so arthritic and not arthritic. That's for bones, but they have a bunch of plaque buildup and they're just stiff and they can't expand and collapse. They don't have the ability to auto-regulate the way a healthy person would. So that their blood pressure just seems to just be all over the place. So they could be incredibly challenging to manage blood pressure wise. And they're also hard to wake up because you can't over-narcotize them. They're not going to have lots of pain, but yet they can't cough because, gosh forbid, they get a hematoma on their neck and then they have a deviated trachea and now it's an airway emergency, So it's challenging to wake those patients up because you can't have them cough, but yet they have to be awake enough to where they squeeze your hands and stick out their tongue, wiggle their toes. And so it's challenging to get someone with a tube in their mouth to be calm and do those things without being like, ah, and like, again, you have this big incision in their neck. And so they're usually holding pressure on the neck, and you're trying your best to like just time the extubation to like not stir the giant, not stir the beast, and literally know based on your end tidal agent where they're at with the stage 2 delirium and just kind of emergence delirium kind of thing, and don't stir the giant until they can have some, ability to think like, oh, I'm in the operating room. I just woke up from surgery versus, disinhibited, crazy, like, where am I? I don't know where I'm at, but I feel threatened. I'm going to fight. You don't want them to wake up like that. So those were a challenge. All right. So we did open heart, thoracic, vascular, and then, so those are my favorite. And, I've done neuro, I've done OB, I've done kids, and I actually am a peds CRNA. That is my favorite population. And I don't know if it's just the phase in my life that I'm in, but I love babies. So I enjoy working with kids. Sometimes it's sad. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes I feel like I'm becoming more paranoid. I'm a more paranoid parent working with like the kid population. You see dog bites and like, the burns, or I'm like, I don't know, just you see crazy stuff. And like cancer and things like that. But I love working with kids. It's just enjoyable. And if I can love on someone else's kid for a little bit, even if it's just for a few minutes, going to sleep and waking up, that makes me really feel satisfied, and it's rewarding. So I think the kids by far, at least at this point in my life, I don't know if you would have asked me like 5 years ago, I probably wouldn't have said peds was my favorite population, but it's definitely becoming my favorite population at this point in my life. But yeah, I've done EP lab, which, so let's kind of shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about like, what are my least favorite types of cases. And it's funny because for the longest time, I used to say it was not neuro. I've always said neuro, but I used to say ortho a lot. And I've kind of started to think like ortho, I don't dislike ortho. And I'll get into like maybe what I don't like about it. I'll get into that. But, I actually don't mind it anymore. And it has not made my least favorite list anymore. But the reason why it used to be on my least favorite list, ortho, was because, and this is totally just me being, whatever, who I am. But I don't like the banging, the blood splurting everywhere, the chainsaws. It's like, seems so barbaric. They take this hammer and they're like, bang, bang, bang. You're like, oh my gosh. Like, it seems so barbaric. I get it, but holy moly. So that's actually why I didn't like ortho. That was it, because it just disturbed me. Equally such, I don't like watching BKAs where they like chop off someone's leg and carry it across the room, and you just see this leg being carried across the room. You're like, oh my gosh, they just chopped off this leg like that. I don't know why. I don't mind open heart, seeing a beating heart and an open in the chest, but seeing a leg being carried across the room, or having someone bang on someone's body part with a giant hammer, to where they're rattling over the bed. It's just disturbing to me. So that's why I didn't like ortho. But they actually do the cases anesthetic wise. We'll get into that a little bit, but that actually made my easiest list. So my least favorite are neuro, and I've never liked neuro. And I don't know if that'll ever change, but I still really don't like neuro. It's not that I mind it. I'll do neuro. I don't mind doing backs and things like that, but it's just not what I would want to go in and do. I don't really like brains, which is weird because I like hearts, but I don't like brains. Like, I don't like seeing brains. It's not like, ew, it's all wrinkly and gooey, and the fact that there's like no nerve endings on it, and you can be awake and they can touch your brain and you'll be like, yeah, hi, cool, I'm fine. It's just weird. I don't know. It just totally weirds me out. Like, I did an awake cranie in school. I haven't done one since, but it was just crazy. Like, we sedated the patient, to crack the skull and get the skull off, but then we woke them up and just ran them on a Precedex infusion, and they were like talking with their skull cut off. It was just insane. Like, I was like, what? They weren't wide awake, but they were awake. Awake enough to like interact and do things. They had to be for the case. But I was just like, no, thank you. It just freaks me out. So yeah, I'm not crazy about neuro. Backs. I don't know if any CRNA enjoys proning a patient, but I sure as heck don't enjoy proning a patient, especially when they're like 400 or 500 pounds, and you're like, I have to like flip this person on their stomach. Then we deal with like, their belly and hindering their, preload, because and making sure that everything's positioned just so, and it's just hard to do because they're just so big. And then they deal with drool and slobber slopping all over the floor and just boogers and blah. Like, it's not my favorite thing. So a lot of times, that doesn't mean you're always prone in neuro cases, but a lot of times you're prone in neuro cases. So that's why it's one of my pet peeves. I just don't like prone. I just don't like it. I also equally don't like when they put their head in tongs, and then, which is like these big bolts that go into the side of the head, and then they just have their head hanging by this giant heavy device. And I'm just like, oh my God, be so careful with their neck. I mean, typically when you prone someone with the Mayfield tongs in, the surgeon actually takes the head while you flip, and then they do the same thing when they go supine. They're the ones who control, because you have to be so careful with the patient's neck, right? Because their head is bolted into this device that's into their skull, and it's heavy. It's a big piece of metal that they secure to the bed. And then their head just hangs suspended in this bolted device. It's just crazy. It's barbaric, right? You're probably like, oh my gosh, Jenny, I never want to go. I never want to go and have surgery on myself. Yeah, I don't really know if I want to have surgery on myself either. But I mean, I've seen a lot at this point, and yeah. So neuro is just not really my thing. I don't like the 180 degrees away from me. I'm a control freak. Yes, I know it's a problem, but I'm a control freak. I like feeling like I have control. And when their head is 180 degrees away and they're prone in Mayfield tongs, I don't feel like I have as much control. Like, if you estimate my patient, I'm going to be angry. So don't step on the wires. Obviously do your due diligence and take things up out of the way, but it's just a lot of positioning, a lot of time and effort goes into positioning. And then their head's dangling under the drapes 180 degrees away, and you're like, I really hope everything's okay underneath there. Obviously you can go intermittently check, but that's equally not super convenient to do. You're crawling underneath the drapes with a flashlight. And so anyways, it's just, I like them supine with their head near me, or at least face up, even if they're 90 degrees away or 180 degrees away, if their head is at least sitting on a pillow versus being suspended and hanging in tongs, it's just, I like that a little bit more. So anyways, enough about neuro. Go on all day. It's never been my favorite. Okay. EP, so EP is not bad. I mean, it's honestly, they're easy, like EP cases, which is electrophysiology. For those of you who don't know, for like AFib ablations, SVT ablations, things like that, they're easy. I mean, there's a lot of work in the beginning. You usually do like an A-line or big bore IV at minimum, intubate. But then after that, you just sit there, and they're honestly kind of boring. Maybe you'll do isoproterenol or something like that to try to elicit an arrhythmia. But for the most part, you don't really do a whole lot. You give, heparin and protamine at the end, but it's just, you sit there. But there's so much radiation. So that's why it made my least favorite, because you just get blasted. And I'm like, I don't want cataracts. I like my eyes. Thank you. And like, you see all the EP docs have these special goggles where they have, their lead protected goggles. I'm like, can I get a pair of those, please? Because I'm here doing anesthesia all day long in these cases. So that's why that made my least favorite list, because I don't like being around that much radiation. Also why ortho is not also one of my favorites, although the radiation in an ortho case is pretty minor compared to what you would get in an EP case. But that being said, I don't like x-ray. I don't like dealing with like C-arms, and also neuro, when they bring in that O-arm, or like this, the O-ring, not O-arm, the O-ring, it's like this, it's like a CT scan on the OR. You have to actually step out of the room because there's that much radiation. No, thank you. I always like have this fear of like you come back in a room after that happens and you're like, is there still radiation just scattering off the walls everywhere and bouncing into my brain, But like when they bring in the circle, the pretty much OR CAT scan, pretty much, you literally have to leave the room, and you're like, you try to get the patient ever just so slightly perfect as far as what their pressure is and everything like that. But then you have to step out. Sometimes I forget, but once it starts going, it can't stop. So you're watching in the window and you're like, I hope their pressure hangs, You're just like, ugh. But there's no stimulation, right? So usually at that time, their pressure's like, rah, 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 and you're like, ugh, hurry up, So another reason why I don't like neuro. But yeah, EP, I just don't like the radiation. Number 3 of my least favorite is OB. So I had a love-hate relationship with OB. I really loved it when I loved it, but I really hated it when I hated it. So the hate part of it really outweighed what I loved about it. So, and what I mean by that, like, don't get me wrong, like, sometimes you have a beautiful day up there where like everything's like wonderful. You give amazing epidurals and they're so grateful and thankful. And they cooperate with you, and they're just like a beautiful family. You're like, this is amazing. Like, I'm so excited for you guys. Congratulations. You get to do C-section, same thing. It's like just beautiful. I love babies, like I said. bringing a baby in the world is the most amazing gift. And I think it's amazing. It's a miracle. But then I'd have days where I kind of had the opposite experience where, no one was grateful and just like a lot of dysfunction and just like kind of sadness and sorrow where I was like, ugh. Like, so it could either be like all rainbows and sunshine or just nothing but storms and clouds, right? And the storms and clouds really stuck with me and kind of like, it was like, ugh, I don't know, but it just was, like I said, this love-hate relationship with it and then the other thing too, in OB, and I've been through so many like dire emergency things in the anesthesia realm and OR, but when you're dealing with this emergency in an OB world, you have two lives at stake. You have baby and you have mom, right? So either one's bad, right? So now it's like you're responsible for two people, and obviously mom's your priority as a anesthesia provider, because without mom, baby will die, but it can just get real ugly real fast, like in a second, right? The baby loses heartbeat, take it out, they're blue and chest compressions. Mom's like, I don't know, it's just, or mom's not doing good, so it's just kind of, it could just go icky really, really fast, and it can just feel like the room's spinning around you, and you can only do so much. So it's just, I don't know, it's just not my cup of tea. Like, here I am, I've had 3 babies, and every time I'm terrified because I know too much, right? I'm like, no, I know way too much. But equally so, it can be really rewarding. So don't be deterred from doing OB, but this is just my own personal preference is why I don't like it. I'm just sharing with you guys. But you may be like, Jenny, I think you're crazy. I love OB. I love the rock and roller coaster ride of OB. All right, so let's go into now what are some of the easiest and what are some of the hardest anesthetics that I've ever provided. Really, let's go into the easiest first. Really the easiest cases, in my opinion, like 100% are always like robotics or general like lap appies, lap choles. They're usually pretty straightforward, pretty easy. Nothing too exciting, especially robots, because they're just slow. Like you have to dock and undock, and I'm actually at a place now where they're actually, they're relatively, it's still slow, but it's relatively quick for a robotic. I've worked at other places where robotics are just painfully long. So I'm in a place now where it's actually pretty decent for a robotic, but it's still really slow. And so it's fine. I don't mind like cases that are really like kind of not happening. In fact, it's kind of a nice break from the craziness that you can experience. And it's funny because some people are like, oh, being a CRNA is like 90% boredom, 10% sheer terror, which is true to an extent, but the boredom is like really nice because you're like, it's a mental break from the stress. So you need cases like that otherwise you would fatigue and probably hate your career, right? So would you want 90% sheer terror and 10% boredom? No. So it's actually not a bad thing. But I just think they're really pretty straightforward, pretty easy. And unless they puncture something that's unexpected, it doesn't really usually go too unexpected. And the only time it can be kind of challenging is if you are, on their head and they're bigger and you have a harder time ventilating them. That can get challenging. They have so much new technology now, though, that has made ventilation so much easier as far as the type of gas they use and the different system they use to gauge the pressure that they need to keep the abdomen inflated for the surgeon. It's gotten so much better than what it even was 8 years ago. So it's becoming way better as far as being able to ventilate a bigger patient that way. But that can be a challenge, don't get me wrong. Or if they develop crepitus because they've been insufflated for so long, they will eventually start accumulating CO2 because of it. That can happen. So the shorter the robotic case, the better. Like you don't want an 8-hour robot. Like heck no, like that's miserable. But, an hour, okay. Maybe an hour and a half. But when you have a 3-4 hour robot, like those can be painful. But relatively just usually straightforward. And then, general lap appies, choles. So when you start as a new student, you're probably gonna be put in a lot of general rooms because they are the easier cases to manage. You may not feel like that. So if you're like, Jenny, those don't feel easy, it's because you're new. So give yourself a little bit of a break here. I'm talking with 8 years experience. But they do that on purpose because you don't want to go into an open heart first or a neuro case first or I mean, EP I think would be relatively easy, but still probably overwhelming, or OB, that would be really overwhelming. So they do tend to put you in cases like robots and general cases when you're new to the OR as a student, because it just helps you get the repetition. You need the reps, right? You need to get the repetition in to get the comfort level you need to start advancing into other more challenging aspects of providing anesthesia. Ortho made the easiest list. Ortho, because it is relatively straightforward and easy. Now, don't get me wrong, a 99-year-old hip can be a complete nightmare. But for the most part, if you're doing like, just a fracture of any kind, it's pretty straightforward, and there's not usually a lot of blood loss, and it's just pretty easy. Sometimes you get to do spinals, and then you just do a MAC or like a twilight anesthetic with a spinal. So I think ortho made my easy list as far as it's just not hard to provide anesthesia for ortho cases most of the time, especially if you have a peripheral nerve block, like if you're blocking like the shoulder or the arm of some kind. It makes your job really easy. They're not going to have pain afterwards. You just got to keep them asleep so they don't have a memory of the procedure. So it's just pretty straightforward. Then the last of the easiest types of cases are plastics. Now, don't get me wrong. Some plastics can be challenging, but for the most part, plastics are pretty easy too. It's just like, you keep them asleep. You don't really have tons of pain afterwards. Now, if you do like a nose job, you might run a Remy drip, but I mean, it's usually allows you to wake them up pretty smoothly. I've done a lot of plastics when I worked at the surgery center, and again, those were usually like nice days because they're really, really straightforward and pretty easy. Boob jobs, liposuction, tummy tucks, all that stuff. Now, sometimes you were proning those patients depending on where they're taking all the stuff from, but it's a pretty straightforward general anesthetic. That made my easy list. Now, let's get into what's the hard types of cases to do. I already kind of hinted towards a few of them. One of them is thoracic. Those are hard. I think lungs are harder than hearts because they're shorter cases. Like hearts were nice. You got like the pump period where you're taking a nice little breather. You're like, ooh, they're on pump. I'm off. I get to sit here for 40 minutes and just like get my grip around coming off pump, right? Prepare drugs, whatever I need to do. Essentially, during an open heart case, you get a break when they go on pump because you're just having a baseline gas on, but the perfusionist does everything else at that point. You may occasionally give some insulin or something like that, but otherwise, they're technically doing all that on pump. So hard cases. So lungs are hard because, like I said, they're shorter cases and you're doing a lot as far as managing ventilation. I mean, there were some lungs, you guys, where between doing the thoracic epidural, the Dummelubin tube conformation placement, you have to always double check to make sure the lung's down, clamp it off, unclamp it, clamp it off, suction goobers out of there, make sure they're not, getting blocked with secretions, one-hand ventilation, on and off the vent, blood pressure, blah, blah, blah. Because when you're inflating, deflating the lungs, you can cause a lot of shifts in preload. It was a lot. And then they're like, we're done. You're like, I haven't charted anything. And then you get the epidural pump in the room. You're trying to set that up. And I mean, it just was a lot. So usually by the time like the surgeon's done, you're like, whew, I'm sweating back here. And I haven't done any charting because I've just tended the patient the entire time and done all the other things. So those can make your head spin. Even with experience, lungs would make my head spin from time to time. Not all of them, but some of them were just like crazy. We were pretty much hands-on the entire time because you're, having to deal with desaturation and trying to come up with a lung, down with a lung, giving some pee, putting some oxygen down through the tube, suctioning and confirming placement and unclamping and reclamping and getting that epidural pump going. And you're just like, then they're like, we're done. And you're like, ah. So lungs can be really hard. Yeah, I think I put that as like my, and I've done a lot of other like randomly hard cases. I mean, as far as like, there's been some vascular that have been incredibly hard. Neuro that have been incredibly hard. Hard in the sense that just a lot of fluid management, a lot of hemodynamic instability. But for the most part, like routine cases that are hard, I just really shared with you what I thought. For the most part, most cases are not routinely hard, although lungs seem to be consistently routinely hard. Hearts could be hard on occasion, but there are also hearts that were just beautiful, and I'm like, oh, I love this, right? It's a nice mixture of challenge and ease, especially when you kind of get into a routine with it. But like lungs, just every now and then, like I said, you just like, it's like sucker punch you. You're like, oh, it's freaking hard. TAVRs could, same thing. Like I did a lot of TAVRs and some of them were just beautiful. Other ones were just like, oh, complete, they were just a lot of work. for whatever reason, instability, the valve didn't get placed right, the patient had to get intubated and put fully to sleep versus just on a Precedex infusion. So I think every case has potential to be hard. Let me just leave this with that, is that no matter what you do, it could be plastics, it could be ortho, it could be robot, right? Like I just said, sometimes you have a hard time ventilating a robot. Any anesthetic can become hard. So I guess don't ever think that just because you're scheduled for a general day that you're going to have it easy, because the patient could make it hard, right? So just keep in the back of your mind and kind of stay on your toes, because at any moment, that's actually one of the things that I think that is probably where a lot of our stress comes into play in this profession, but it equally becomes one of those things that you actually enjoy, because it keeps you vigilant and it keeps you like connected to what you're doing, if that makes sense. I'm not sure the better phrase I'm looking for, but it keeps you like in it. It keeps you thinking, it keeps you engaged, it keeps you just like present within what you're doing, versus like, this is not a job, you guys, where you can just like zone out and be like, blah, 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 blah. No, you're always engaged, but that's really enjoyable and really rewarding. So becoming a CRNA by far is the best thing that I ever did with my career. And I'm honored and grateful to be here sharing this with you. I really hope you become a CRNA. And if you're already in CRNA school, I hope this episode was really insightful for you. Thank you so much for tuning into CRNA School Prep Academy. I appreciate you so very much. So until next week, you guys all have a wonderful one, and I will talk to you soon. All right, bye. Hey, future CRNA, as always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so very much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to tag me at CRNA School Prep Academy so I can personally thank you. Be sure to head over to CRNASchoolPrepAcademy.com to check out our blog and gather free resources to help you along your CRNA journey. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.